Awesome. I'm going to get right between you two, and then I promise I will give you your space. Thank you. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. Thank you for joining us for our event with Dale Maharidge and Katherine Seligman celebrating Burn Coast. Let's give it up for these two. Yay. Thank you. I'm Cara. I'm the events coordinator for Green Apple, and I'm really glad that you folks are here in person. I know it's like a very special thing to like be in a bookstore right now, and I'm so appreciative of you folks that are joining us online from all over the place. Very appreciative of you as well. I wanted to do a couple bits of housekeeping before we get started. First, thank you for keeping your masks on. Thank you for showing me your proof of vax. Trying to minimize our risk here. We want to keep this going while we can. We're trying to keep everyone safe. You'll see that Dale and Katherine have their masks off. That's why we're keeping ours on to give them that grace for event purposes. So thank you for being cool about it. Second, so unfortunately, and I hate to say these words, but supply chain issues. We don't have any copies of Dale's book this evening, but you know, everyone's working really hard. We're all doing our best. Like warehouse people are working very hard, mail carriers are working very hard. So we have a temporary solution, and that solution is that we have these postcards for Dale's book. And they have the date and they have the title on them. They even have our bookstore on the back of them. So Dale's going to sign these. You can still purchase your books here. And when they arrive, if you want it for pickup, we will let you know. It should be in the next couple of days. If you want them shipped, we can do that as well. But you can purchase them at the front, grab one of these postcards, and Dale will, he'll sign them at the back, right?
Yeah, and it's Sharpie on the front. I can do a nice, you can put it in the book then.
Yes,
if you have a
perfect.
Sharpie, great.
Yes, absolutely. So that's the whole thing. Thank you for being accommodating and understanding. And that's what we're doing. And plus they're really cool. They have the date on them. They're unique that way. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the folks that are joining us this evening. To my right, we have Katherine Seligman, who is a journalist and author of At the Edge of the Haight, which if you haven't read, you should. We have copies available at the front, not to, you know, interrupt her bio saying that. At the Edge of the Haight won the Penn Bellwether Prize for socially engaged fiction. She has been a reporter at USA Today, San Francisco Examiner, and a staff writer at the San Francisco Chronicle Sunday magazine. Her writing has appeared in Life, Redbook, The Sun magazine, the anthology Fresh Takes, and elsewhere. Her essay, Someone to Listen, was a Best American Essays notable selection. She lives in San Francisco. Please do welcome Katherine Seligman. And last but certainly not least, Dale Maharidge is a tenured professor at the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University. He's the author of 10 books, one of which was awarded the 1990 Nonfiction Pulitzer Prize. He's a visiting professor at Stanford University. He's written for Rolling Stone, George Magazine, The Nation, Mother Jones, New York Times, among many others. Maharidge was a 1988 Nieman Fellow at Harvard. He's had artistic residencies at both Yaddo and the MacDowell Colony. His first book, Journey to Nowhere, The Saga of the New Underclass, inspired Bruce Springsteen to write 2 songs. That's never been in any other bio I have read for an author. His second book, And Their Children After Them, won the Pulitzer Prize. His debut novel, Burn Coast, is the reason we are here this evening. Please join me in welcoming Dale Maharidge.
I had 3 books published in the pandemic. The first one was called Snowden's Box. I dated Laura Poitras and got caught up and was part of the Snowden leak. And then the second one was called Fucked at Birth. It was a pandemic book about pandemic America. And then this book. So the first time in 3 books in 2 years to be able to actually have a live audience, not just the people on the web. And then and my friend Danielle pointed out, well, for them, it's the first time in 2 years they've been listeners. So it's really good to be here. I think for my part, I hope for you too. It's wonderful to have an actual event. So Green Apple, thank you.
I would second that. It's really great to be in person and to have people out there knowing they're listening to this. Dale talk about his wonderful new book, and especially coming after those 2, one which you can't say in all audiences, you know?
Yeah. That's right. It's not a G-rated type. There's a reason, but it wasn't gratuitous. There's a reason, but I won't go into it.
I really enjoyed the book. Really, just went right through it. And there's so many things I want to ask you about. So let me get
let's start.
right
Yeah.
to it. Being a journalist, also having a background in journalism, I'm curious if you can talk about what led you to the subject. And I know you spent time in Northern California in this area called the Redwood Curtain at some point. I'd like you to talk about that. And at what point did you realize you wanted to write this book? What was the seed for this book?
Well, I've done actually 13 books. That's bios. It doesn't matter. But nonfiction, I write about serious issues. I'm immersive journalist. I spend years with some of these books and really get into people's heads, but you can't get inside. I could spend 3 years interviewing you and hanging out with you, but I can't go inside your head. So in fiction, you can go there. This book really started in 1996-ish when medical marijuana was legalized. I purchased a piece of land up in the Emerald Triangle, and it wasn't going to be a grower, professor who happened to be moving in among growers, and I built a homestead, off-the-grid homestead. And when I moved there, I was a little nervous. I asked one of the people I knew who lived there, are they going to accept me? I'm not a grower. And then one guy said, he says, just by living there, you're an outlaw. They will accept you. And they did. And I got to know these people very intimately. And these were the hippies who came in the early 70s. They went almost literally from the summer of love here in the city to going back to the land. And I was a subscriber to Mother Earth News when it first came out, and which documented these people. Then the High Times, I was a high school kid and I read High Times, and they had these pictures of these weird growers on this Northern California coast. Suddenly I'm living among them. They took me into their confidence, and I wasn't going to write anything about them. And then weed was legalized, and you started seeing a change. Bulgarian and Mexican mobsters and Mexican cartels started coming in. I mean, these were serious, big operations. And my neighbors grew plants by the several dozen. They were clandestine. The weed price in 1992 or 3, when I first went up there and really started hanging out, was like, it hit $4,000 a pound. That's like $6,000 or $7,000 today. That weed today is $750. So they could grow a few plants. They were artists. There was a guy who played with Jimi Hendrix on the ridge. There was a painter who was just amazing. And you could be a hippie and have a way of life. The way of life started changing in the 90s. And then by 2008, I had my second Yaddo residency. Decided I'm going to start tackling this. I started working in this book in 2008. It took this long for me to do this book. I think in part because I was so close to it. In part, we'll talk about this too, how fiction is different than journalism. I've read Katherine's novel, and we have many things in common. I think an approach in the work. It's a beautiful novel, and you really got inside the head of your character. And so, anyway, that's a long answer to a very short question.
Well, I'm curious, was there one thing that happened that set this off, or was it just the cumulative being there and feeling like it was, there's something that drew you in so much?
Well, it's another world up there. And I was in the world, and I didn't want to write about it. It's like, the proverbial crapping in your own nest. But then I had to. And one of my neighbors, who's a longtime old hippie grower, said, Dale, it's over for the guy with the shovel. You need a bulldozer to make it. And that was like, I'm watching a way of life. And basically, the novel is about the end of the 1960s. As one of my characters talks about in the novel, it didn't happen in Benedict Canyon on Cielo Drive with the Sharon Tate murder. It didn't happen at Altamont, like Hunter Thompson said. The 60s kept going on up there. Because when I moved there in the 90s, it was still the 60s. And I mean, total hippie scene. I mean, the community was wonderful. And I started to see that unravel. And it was sad. And the documentarian in me, and several people said, why not do it in nonfiction? And I couldn't be as honest as I was in the fiction. So it had to be a novel. It wasn't a choice. I had to go down that road.
Yeah, but sometimes nonfiction can go in for truth in a way that is harder to do in nonfiction.
Yeah.
So which gets me to the next question, which is how did your background, this extensive background that you had in immersive journalism, help you or perhaps hinder you in some ways?
Well, when I started working for newspapers, I was told by editors that I was too literary for newspapers. Then when I started writing books, book editors were saying, "You're too much of a journalist. You're too newspaper-like." And so, there's a different voice. And so I had to find that voice for the book. That's one answer. The journalism helps in that if you do it right, like the way I immerse, I look for details. Like in my Alabama book, the Pulitzer book, there was a woman who was the daughter of one of the sharecroppers that James Agee had documented. And she had a double mastectomy and a hysterectomy, and she blamed the chemicals on the cotton. And I just come from a church service where the husband, I called him Hubbard, was taking her to basically get healed, and her breasts would grow back. This guy was a creep. Oh, and so I show up at the Huddle House. It's a pancake house. They're in separate vehicles. He comes in first, she comes in second, and he said, "How'd you park the truck?" She said, "Normal. Women don't know how to park their truck." So he goes out to park the truck. There's Madonna song playing on the loudspeaker, and he leaves. She starts tapping to the song. As soon as he comes back, she stopped tapping. Well, journalism teaches you to look for those moments that reveal. Well, those are the kind of moments that translate into fiction. Things that are not overt, but if you look, you see, and you hear. And so the journalism training for that detail, I think, was massively helpful. But I still had to get over writing like a journalist. I don't know if you had this problem with your book. You probably didn't. I did. I had to get out of the voice of journalism and go into the art realm and kind of let myself be free. And so it was a long process.
So also related, there's a line in the book that goes, and I will read it here. Just as there is method acting for the screen, there is method journalism, or perhaps it is method living. And I want you to talk about that. And for those people who haven't read the book yet, it's the book of a major character in the book is a journalist who's formerly from the LA Times, which you were
Never.
Yeah, you made that up. But he's making this observation, and that really struck me, and I'd like to talk about it.
Well, you talked about truth a little while ago, and it's kind of a cliche, but it's true. Truth is true. In terms of, I tell my students, you have to get at a truth. And when I do a nonfiction book, I want to get at the core of something that's going on. To do that, you go back and you go back and you go back and you go back. I just came from Tucson last week. I did a project called Escape from El Salvador in the 80s. And I'm doing a collection now from my newspaper days. I interviewed a man from 37 years ago. I hadn't seen him. And I love going back and that layering. I learned from him in hindsight. Also in Sacramento, I interviewed a fellow I interviewed like 39 years ago. And I won't go into the weeds of the story, but he went back and worked for the CIA in Cambodia. It was about a Vietnam story. And he told me truths and things I never would have gotten back then. So I'm going to layer this into the work. I can't count how many times I've gone back to characters. If you look at my books, there'll be running characters through my books, real life characters. And so I like that developing. So it's like method acting, which is method actors become the character. They go native, and you go native. When I was in the South, I started getting a little bit of Southern accent. And it wasn't people like, well, you're faking that. No, I just started doing it. I lived in Boston. I started talking like Boston, Boston. I can't even say it now. We're human. And so when you can start doing that, you can start understanding people. You're never going to really know anybody, but as much as I can, like we rode the rails for the first book, riding with the guy across Kansas when it's freezing and we haven't eaten in 2.5 days. There's something verite about that I'm not him. I have a credit card in my wallet. I will go home to a job, but as close as I can get to understanding. And I think it's the same thing in fiction. you know, having immersed myself in the culture up there and then translating it was method living. It wasn't even journalism at that point. Yeah. I was of the story.
Yeah, I've often thought that's really interesting because I've often thought that you know, method acting has a lot to do with how you perceive the character in fiction. So you know, that's something I found myself doing. Was I was writing a story that was complete fiction set in a neighborhood that I knew very well, and I had to really walk as if I was this character, which I physically did many times.
I want to talk to you about that often when I want to go
yeah.
into weeds on that because yeah, I felt like you walked behind this girl and knew her.
But as you said, it was a long process. Yeah, that's interesting. And still on the character of the journalist, who I found so interesting, not only because I have been a journalist, but just because I think this was a really interesting character who was sort of escaping something by living there. He says, I've conducted hundreds of reportorial autopsies, and that he, quote, simply kept a running diary of my life. And does that, you know, do you feel like that relates to you?
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, I call them autopsies because as much as we can, again, to get at the truth, I want to dissect the situation. I want to understand the facets of a character. There's a character, I have a friend who accuses me of calling people I write about characters. Maybe I disassociate. In my Denison, Iowa book, I lived in an Iowa meatpacking town for a year. It was 1/3 immigrants. And 10 years before, there were no Latino immigrants there. And the mayor, who was, when I first went there, he's going to help them adjust. He's going to be very open. He's Republican, but he's liberal. He's going to help these people. In the end, he ended up screwing over the first Latino businessman. And it wasn't racial. It was basically good old boy politics. And, you know, I wrote it as it was, but I also wrote the mayor, Ken, as a multifaceted character. And some people wrote to me, you were too nice to him. You should have, you know, but it's not real. And so I like the nuance in character. And that's, again, fiction is more liberating because you can actually, you know, get a lot more nuance into characters.
Now, before I go to the next questions, I was wondering if you have a part you want to read. You know, do you have a printed out excerpt, or do you want to read a portion of? I have a copy of this beautiful book, which you can see. So
I'm not the best reader. I've only read like 3 times in all the years I've had books because I think I'm a happy reader. But I think there's a section that gets into place, and I wanted to create an atmosphere. It's a very distinct culture. It's fog-bound. It's remote. The roads suck, and they sucked more when I first moved in there. The last 45 miles took an hour and a half to traverse. It became 2.5 hours because the big road trucks started. The pavement got all smashed, and so it's kind of a nutso place that way. So the character Will and Lakowski are putting flyers out for missing one of their neighbors. And so there's a road called the Cougar, which is just crazy. So even as I raced the Cougar's gauntlet, but he couldn't have been sleeping, not on the Cougar. Jesus, or could he? Visibility was 3 car lengths. It's good there were no other drivers stupid enough on that road in that fog. Lakowski's grill would have ended up in their asses. There was always fog on the Cougar, the road that crosses the Coast Range and connected us to the distant town, to America. But this fog night was ridiculously thick, even for a black fog. You go into the clouds in the Cougar, ascend to the realm of the moon and sun, and after you get to know it, after years of driving that snake, you embrace risk. Otherwise, it takes 2 hours to get home. You can make it an hour and a half, an hour 15 if you're really crazy. If you've got it down, have the entire course imprinted in memory, keep a foot on the gas and have fast reflexes. Left, sharp right, sharp left, straight away, 500 feet. You're okay here. Hairpin left, right, up, more up. Christ, it never ends. Like a video game. Get it wrong, however, false familiarity will kill you in 1 second. One left instead of right, you're zapped over the edge. Adios, motherfucker, for real. 40 miles of for real. 40 miles of unrelenting being on game. That's the road in. So then you get there and it gets weird. So it's my neighbors call it not America. I forget, I went to there's a big hippie gathering that doesn't happen anymore, but it was a hippie gathering. And I showed up with a neighbor. She was playing the tuba. She was playing God Bless America or something. And this 13-year-old girl sitting on the fence. And what song is that? And she said, it's America's birthday song. And the girl looked at her and she said, this is not America. And so it's another place. It's so close to us, but yet it's so far away.
You did manage to give a great description of it. And the woman, there's a woman in the very beginning who disappears, and that sort of sets in motion a lot of the things that happen in the book. And she is a tuba player.
Yes, yes. So there's shades of some people, but they're fictional. There was a guerrilla grower down the coast. He's probably 7% of what Lekowski, the character. And then another grower is another 4%. And then, and part of it with Lekowski was a very important character for me because he's named after a kid I grew up with who had a disease. I think it was multiple sclerosis. He'd be dead before 40. And I got to know Lekowski pretty well. And I only imagine if Lekowski had lived, he'd have become Lekowski. And it also, I had a tie to Kent State. I knew somebody who was there when the shootings happened in May 4th, 1970. He was standing next to Sandy Shar when her blood sprayed all over him. And very impacted me. I was very young. I only lived 20 miles from Kent State where I grew up. And then I knew somebody in the Weather Underground. And I did some things that I won't go into. And so this history of the left and Lekowski's mystery, it's probably 15 characters, and then the other half is made up. So there's a lot of amalgam in this, but did you do that with your novel? Did you have characters who you cobbled?
I would say that my novel was based on something that happened, but there were things that influenced me along the way, but I didn't use any specific people.
It's real and it's not.
Things I'd heard. Yeah. Talk to people. The characters, the narrator, and many of the other characters, they're such outliers and, off the grid, many of them, loners, worried about being discovered. Lekowski has a fear of being found out. Zoe lives off the grid and then she's gone. You don't really know. And everyone has something to hide. And I just wanted you to talk about that theme in the book about this sense that nobody really knows what anybody else is up to.
And everybody has a backstory. Everybody has, and it's really a microcosm of America. I mean, you think about it. This is something that influences my work. I mean, Sir Thomas More, Utopia. It goes back to that. The people who came here with a genetic pool who were seeking utopia. They end up on the East Coast. And then what happens? They have children, and those children end up in California. But of those children, both east and of California, the ones who went to Humboldt were the extreme. It's the end of the road up there. As one of my neighbors said, you can't see the end. It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from here. And it's like this distilled America. We've been on the run from Europe, and you hit this edge, and there's nowhere else to go. And so everybody has their secrets. Everybody's there as an outsider. I identify as an outsider. Here I'm talking to you, hope fluently, but I really was a shy kid. I couldn't talk to people. I grew up as a son of a blue-collar steel worker. Nobody went to college. I didn't fit in. Like right now, I call myself the hound dog in the house of poodles. When I was at Stanford, I mean, all these PhDs and doctors. I don't have a degree. I tell my students, you ask your money back. I don't have a degree. I went to college for 3 years and I dropped out. So I never fit in, and so I identify with outsiders. I love outsiders. I'm drawn to them. Although I have a thing. We had Tom Wolfe come in to be a visiting scholar at Stanford for a quarter. He was researching one of his novels, and no university would let him in. And so Ted Glasser, my department chair, and I were the department. And we got this letter, and Ted said, nobody will let him in, he says, because they were afraid they're going to burn him. He says, we deserve to be ripped. Let's have him come at us, you know? Come on, Tom. Anyway, he had his theory of everything, which was status. And all of his work was on status. I always, then got me thinking, like, what is my theory of everything? And it's class, because I grew up in color, outsider, identify with working class people, poor people, because that's who I knew. And then I dated a poet in middle aughts. She read a lot of my work, and I told her this, and she says, she says, your theory of everything is in class. It's dislocation, displacement. That's the theme in your work. And she actually made me realize that. Probably the only good thing about the relationship. I hope she's not listening. I love her. I love her. But it was rocky. But it was a revelation for me.
Yeah, that's definitely a theme in the book, as it is, and it's true in a lot of what you've written. And I think writers do tend to return to certain things, even if they're not aware of it.
Who was it said? I think it was Scott Fitzgerald said, in the real dark heart of the soul, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, day after day after day. That's the best definition of a writer I've ever heard.
That's great. That's great. And so I think that's probably largely why you're drawn to people who are on the margins, which is something you've always done, right? I mean, when did that start? As a reporter, when you were working at a daily newspaper, did you find yourself drawn to those subjects? And is that,
over and over? I did the rail writing with Michael Williamson, the photographer, in 1982. We started working together on a story we called Linos. I know never do that today, but that was homeless. There wasn't homeless. The detox center, and that was in 1980. And then by 1982, we're on the rails with these new job-seeking hobos. And Michael has an orphan background and very impoverished, much more. He was on welfare growing up. I at least wasn't that poor. So we gravitated to these stories. It just was, it ran in the newspaper. I mean, and many other stories from the newspaper of the same ilk. Farm labor. I worked on a farm labor camp for about a month. Various farm labor camps, rather. It was always a natural thing to do as a journalist for me. I mean, I'd rather go hang out with those people than cover the damn state capitol. It doesn't interest me. Celebrities, I don't do celebrity journalism. You don't know.
Yeah, interesting, but I can see that in your work. Also, what I'm curious. You did this very deep dive into both the history of this area and what had come next, and sort of dislodged it, changed everything up there. What was the hardest part of getting this story? I mean, obviously not as a journalist, but what was the hardest part of writing this novel?
You know how it is when you do any piece of work, you want to get it right. And I wanted to get it right. And so there's a lot of violence and a lot of crazy stuff happens, which is real. And I had some stuff happen to me near my land, where I went out one night and people popped rounds over my. I mean, it's a hairy place. Yet it's the most beautiful place in the Lost Coast. I mean, it's gorgeous up there and it's magical. So it's a mix of beauty and love and sheer terror. And that was the reality of really living there. And I wanted to translate that into the novel, because it's not, if you saw the Murder Mountain, the Netflix series, it's all dark and it's all hairy and it's like, that's only one piece of it. That wasn't the full story. So I wanted to have the spectrum, and also what's being lost in our culture. I had a neighbor who grew he was an amazing guerrilla grower, and he voted Republican, even though he's very liberal. He says, they're going to keep it illegal, which will keep those price of weed high. He was voting his self-interest. And I mean, it was just this great characters. And he came out from New York. His father was murdered by the mob, and he had $20 in his wallet, and he owned 600 acres when I knew him. And, his land was still cheap up there then. So it wasn't like he was a billionaire, but you could come up with nothing and make something. It was the last place you could do that. And that's gone. So a piece of America is gone. So I wanted to honor it. And I think this, I hope that the book honors the way
So
of life.
have you been back?
No, no.
Would,
I sold,
would you go back, and will you, if there's a bookstore in the county, would you read? Would you sit down and like read?
I don't know. You know, I psychologically, the guy who bought my place wanted me to visit over and over and over, and I couldn't do it. And then he paid me off last year, and he sent me a encrypted signal message saying, you know, I'm leaving now too. It's gotten too bad. So it's even worse than it was. You know, it's like just too much of my soul is up there. I won't go into the weeds, but my 1980s were the result was the 1990s living there. Basically, I was hiding out from the world. I didn't do much in the 1990s to build my house. I needed the zen of that. And to go back, I don't think I'll go back. I'll never say never, because I never say never. But right now, I have no inclination to go back. I want to keep the memory of what it was, not what it is.
Yeah.
It's like a love.
So are there some people there who you think would read the book?
Oh yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
And I hope they like it because it was done with love. Right? You know, a lot of crazy cool people up there. And I don't, you know, I would hope they would say, yeah, I can't control it. I hope that's it.
But it's not a place you would return to.
Yeah, psychologically,
Yeah.
no.
Interesting. And what do you tell your students about the importance of running towards a story instead of being the kind of, you know, reporter? And there's nothing wrong with this kind of reporter. You know, there's really something to be said for showing up and reporting what's happening now and for posterity and being a truthful, honorable reporter. But there's also a certain kind of reporter that runs towards anything that happens. And what, you know, do you talk about that in your
All the
classes?
time,
Yeah.
all the time. I went back, I left Stanford and went back to Columbia as a visiting professor 2 weeks before 9/11. I watched the second tower go down from my rooftop. Well, I had 3 students who ran down there. I said, okay, those guys are going to they're going to succeed. We run towards falling towers. We don't run from but also we run towards the crazy dark stuff that scares us. And I teach a course called narrative long form journalism, and I'm going to start teaching live and in person in about 2 weeks. And I have the students write a secrets essay, and I say you have to write about a secret, and it has to be something that you may not want to talk about, and it might be hard to write. That's what people want to read. Don't tell me what I know. Go in here, take the knife, and they produce some amazing work, and it loosens them up. So when they do their reporting, they're trying to get people to open up. And I like telling them. I had a doc filmmaker follow me around in 2010 for a project. I was in Detroit with him. After about 3 days of working with him, he said, you don't interview people, you have conversations. And maybe it's the seduction of journalism. You know, journalism is a form of seduction, as James Agee wrote. We are seducing, but I want to have that level of rapport with somebody so I can get at that truth. So it's imbued if we're going to do it well. Again, the person who covers the meetings, that's all they want to do. We need that. We need people documented, especially in the day of declining newspapers. But if you're going to be the kind of journalist who gets at truth, you have to go into that scary place. And you know, whether in fiction or what nonfiction, I always try to go to the scary place, a place that I'm most terrified of. Makes it more interesting.
Yeah, definitely true. Is there someone who writes in that tradition who you've always, I know you've read a lot, but is there someone, when you're teaching or when you're just, thinking about how to proceed, who you go back to?
Well, there's writers, there's contemporary writers, like we were talking before it started, William T. Ballman, Bill Ballman. His work is so verite, so real, and so honest. He's a very honest writer. But fiction, Philip Roth, he transformed me because he gets his own psyche going into the fiction, and you're with him. And if I could come even close to approximating what he does, I'd be very happy. half close, I'd be happy. Joan Didion, I'm a total Joan Didion fan. I love the White Album. I love Slouching Toward Dusk. At her best nonfiction, she just, you know, just. I did a piece for Slate. I was in Sacramento when she died, and I wrote about it. And you know, again, she's a model. And then when I was younger, I was a big Steinbeck fan. He reported the Grapes of Wrath. Actually traveled on the road in Route 66. He went and worked in the migrant camps with Tom Collins. I've been to all those places in the Central Valley. How he took he did a series for the San Francisco Examiner, or News, rather, San Francisco News, the defunct newspaper. So the Examiner, I guess. And translated it to fiction. He's another role model.
What do you find yourself where you're doing a collection of stories now? Do you think you know what's in the future? Would you go back to fiction? Is that something that you think of? Yeah.
I've got
what's on your mind?
I've got 2 novels I'm
You
working
do?
on. Oh yeah, and these are burning. It's pretty public, so I don't mind talking about it. I've been teaching for 31 years. I was a newspaperman for 15 years before that. I'm a geezer, really. I don't have a cane, but I'm a geezer. It's time to leave teaching. So I'm phasing out of Columbia, and whatever good years I have left, I've got 2 novels, I got a collection, and they're in the same realm. Although one is really different. It's going to be challenging. As a writer, you have to challenge yourself. You can't. I don't want to keep doing the same thing. People won't come back to me. Do more homeless stuff. That's for the young people. I did many books on that and many articles. I'm going to just keep hopefully challenging myself and growing.
Yeah, no, I know stuff just, just things will appear that that have been worming their way into your brain.
You don't even know
That's
they're
what I
there.
find. Right,
Yeah.
that's what I'm finding.
Can I throw it back to you? Are you have another novel in your?
I am working on another novel. Yeah, not good to say. But it's also, like it has some of the same themes, which sort of surprised me because it's a completely different setting.
Oh,
But I'm finding that things kind of, worm their way.
yeah, I like that worming. You have to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
That you're just, you can't, there's no way you can do it.
We're having a conversation. You guys are out there.
So, and, was there ever a time when, an assignment just seemed too dangerous or something you'd embarked on? What's sort of the most, because, you've done so many things that, a lot of people might be hesitant to do, jumping on the rails. But I mean, living where you lived and building this, you built the house
Oh, yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
You create a water system. You
Like
create a
what?
power system.
yeah. I mean, what possessed you to do that?
I think I'm about 20% crazy, maybe 30. I don't know. No, there's assignments. I tell my students, when in doubt, get out. But I've also done a lot of stupid things. I mean, I covered the revolution in the Philippines. I was in the Civil War in El Salvador, rails, Snowden leak. I mean, but at some point, you weigh the odds, and there's certain things I wouldn't do. Frankly, I went into the homeless camps in Sacramento for Fucked at Birth, and I was glad I had my fixer, the social outreach worker, because it's hairier now. It's way hairier. And even as a young guy, I'm not sure I would walk in there just alone at this point. And you see what happens to people. So you have to know when to get out and when not to go in, but also you weigh the odds. So that's a long answer to another like simple question. But what's what we do? We run towards fire. As I mentioned before we started, I had COVID early. So I went across America. At that point, I went to Navajo Nation and meatpacking towns. I went to the craziest, hairiest places and documented economic outfall and impact on people, because it's what we do. I wore a mask.
You weren't, but you weren't zooming in. I mean, not that zooming in is great.
To our audience on the
No,
Zoom.
I just mean that, you see a lot of
I don't zoom in.
live, but I see, and we'll watch on the news, a lot of, international stories and things. This just broke, and it will all be,
Yeah.
Zoom. zoomed in, but,
It's,
you know, it doesn't seem.
it's
to
one
be
and a half
there.
dimensional. And, you know, during the
Yeah.
pandemic, my students, actually, I taught live during the pandemic that fall, and they did report outside New York. But some of them had to do Zoom by virtue of some interviews, and they did some creative work. It can be done. It's not the same as being with somebody.
Right, it's hard to look at it. Yeah, a lot of changes to do that. Yeah, I mean, I find myself with that same instinct, even though I haven't worked, you know, for more than 10 years as a daily newspaper reporter. I just, you know, if there's something happens in my neighborhood, I'm out there. You know,
Yeah.
and we always just wait, hey, there was a shooting. Yeah, that's why I'm there. There's a shooting.
I've done this 100 times.
Yeah, so it's, you know.
That's what we do.
silly. Yeah.
But going back to the fiction, going to these two novels I'm working on, one in particular, I'm going to another scary place. And that is interesting to me.
You know, it was scary psychologically, or
Psychologically,
but it's not a risk to you.
No
to go
physical
there.
risk.
Yeah,
It's sometimes the mental risks are worse than the physical risks, as we know.
yeah. Can be, yeah.
Yeah.
But you still find yourself with that. Yeah,
Can't stop.
to do that, yeah.
I'm the scorpion going across the river and stinging the. I got a sting, man.
Yeah, well, so should we, yeah. If there's any.
I see a question already.
Um,
I think you want to go to the microphone for the web audience. Speaking of Zoom, is that it should just. We have a live person too.
Catherine's gonna repeat the question.
Yeah.
I'm so curious what you were just referring to about the scary place that you're putting. Can you say more about that? And then if I can ask the second one, if you could go back to your younger self when you were first getting started, what advice would you give them?
Okay, two questions. One is, if you were, start with the early one. If you were, what would you say to a young writer who's just starting out, an early you? And the second one was,
What was the really scary
What-
place you were just
Oh,
referring to?
the
Scary
scary place, is there, can you say, if you can say specifically, I know some people don't want to talk about exactly what they're writing on, but if you can, good questions.
Yeah. Well, the scary place is you know, we all have terrified of something. You know, it may be intimacy, relationships. You know, it might be, you know, something that happened to us. I've got a friend doing a project about her mother and her father, and it's dark stuff. And there's things to be learned from it. And I grew up in a family where you never talk about the bad stuff. You just, you know, it's over. It happened in the past. My father was a World War II veteran. One of my books is about him. He was blast concussion injury. You get over it. No, you don't. And so the writer goes to that place. And I couldn't do that book until my mother was dead, because to talk right about really what my dad really was about, but it killed her. And so it was one of the scariest psychological places I've been. And I knew a lot of guys from his unit. It took 9 years for that book. And I learned about my dad. And I learned about me, why I'm the way I am. I'm a better person for doing that. It's cheaper than a shrink.
What would you say to a young Dale who was just starting out?
Take risk, and it means a lot of things. Don't be ordinary. Do something that stands out. For instance, my former student from 2003 class is Jessica Bruder, who still dear friends with. We're very, very dear friends. She and her girlfriend are down in Santa Monica. I just left them 2 days ago. She went and lived with homeless women living out of vans and campers, lived in a tent. Became the book called Nomadland, which won the Oscar this year. Movie with the same title. That's her book. I always told her, do something that is going to stand out. Just don't do a book to do a book. That's the stupidest thing you can do. Do something you give a shit about. Do something that hits that sweet spot where it matters to you, but it also, publisher is going to think, I want to buy this. And it's not always easy. Journey to Nowhere was ridiculously easy to sell. I was 27, and I sent to the 10 top publishers in America, I sent a pitch, and the editor called Monday, we want to buy it. No agent, no nothing. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? The second book, the Pulitzer book, nobody wanted to buy. Rejection after rejection after rejection. Like going back to Alabama, because I wanted to do that book. I wanted to find out what happened to this book. And I got to know them, and I cared about them. And at the 11th hour, NPM Books bought it. And just so it has to be that sweet spot of something that's really important, but also that you want to do. Don't do it because somebody thinks you think somebody would want it. That's the depth. And I've had a couple projects, I can speak from experience, that, you know, I probably shouldn't have pursued, and they didn't go anywhere because, you know what, my heart wasn't really in them. Don't do that.
You strike me as someone who puts 100% of himself into his work. Do you think that's a necessity for doing the type of journalism and fiction that you write?
And let me repeat this for people who might not be here. The questioner asked if it seems like you put 100% of yourself into every project you do. And is that necessary? You know, is that a requirement for, you know, well, it's a requirement for you. Is there,
Yeah, no, I think
but for,
how does that permeate your entire outlook on your own life?
how does that permeate your outlook?
You know, I think Michael Williamson was accused once of, you know, being too involved as a photographer. So, you know, it's not what I do, it's who I am. And so to me, my mother would always say, you work too hard. I'm not working when I'm writing or I'm researching. It's not work to me. I'm having fun. I love talking to people. I love finding their secrets. And I love it. It's like a puzzle. So to me, it's a challenge. It's part of what I am. And so I don't look at it as work. But 100%, I never phone anything in. If I do something, I'm going to do it. Either I do it or I don't. I teach my students. We say in Cleveland, growing up in the blue collar house, get your money's worth in the Midwest. You know, they're gonna get their due. And I just don't believe in phoning anything. And I think that's true of any profession. Though I know I have friends who are actors who have the same ethos, visual artists who have the same ethos. Just you don't phone it in, you're gonna be fine. You know, I shouldn't quote him. It's not cool to quote Woody Allen anymore, I guess. But he said there was a line in one of the movies. You know, 90% of success is showing up. You know, and it's true. Just be there. Do we have? These are tough questions.
So in the Emerald Triangle, back to the substance of the book, which of course none of us have read yet. My question is, how far back in terms of homeland identification does it go? Does it start in the 80s? Does it go back to the street branches and landowners and grain before the 80s, before the 70s?
The question is, how much history is there in the book of this very rich area? And do you go back before the time of the hippies? And is there the whole context for?
Oh yeah, well the beginning. Should I read the beginning?
You want to read it? Yes, that's.
I think I'm going to answer it, but with the beginning of the book, I think will answer your question. Again, I normally don't read, so pardon me if I stumble on my own words. So the Bering Coast, noun, a region of California where three tectonic plates meet to form a triple junction fault zone. Epithascan people arrived here during the Ice Age, when 1/3 of the planet was frozen and it was a treeless land, except for the tan oaks in the canyons. They netted salmon and harvested mussels. Carbohydrates came from acorns, ground in stone mortars, and then boiled to remove tannins for flatbread. With the retreat of the ice starting 10,000 years ago, two aggressive species of fir migrated south, century by century from the boreal regions. When the fir reached the triple junction, they began overtaking the valued tan oak. In the late summer, the low dead branches of the invading fir curled down as the trunk trees struggled to conserve water. marking the time for the Apathaskins to set fires. For generations, infernos swept the coastal hills, incinerating young Douglas fir and white fir. The dominant feature of the landscape, thanks to diligent burning, was grassland. In the spring, the hills were bright green as rock kelp. In late summer sunset, the color of ripe persimmons. And so it was until 1857. In that year, Elvin Edwards and the Jones clan rode horses over a ridge and set sight on the Triple Junction grasslands. They invoked God and praised him for creating so much natural bounty for their cattle. By 1861, the men had exterminated most of the 1,200 indigenous people. A band fled south. In one account, they were driven by white pursuers into the sea and drowned. In the other, they were buried or tied down in the sand amid the rocks. And when the tide came in, perished. In both versions, a woman about to die issued a curse. The white man is doomed to never prosper here. That's a true story. That's not made up. I heard that from a lot of old timers. So yeah, it goes, and that spirits are still there. I mean, there's something about that land you feel.
Yeah, well, I think one of the wonderful things about the book is that we do get a sense of this place, both in history and its change, and it really takes us into a world that's really, we can just disappear into.
Yes. The past is the present is the future in that up there. You feel everything when you're there. Do you have online people? All right. Oh, Katya Savchuk. Hey, Katya. I think it emerges naturally. We are what we are. You know, Joan Didion wrote about, she just was terrified of interviewing people. She hated interviewing people. She was shy. I never got the fortune of meeting her, but I have friends who did, and terribly, you are what you are. So you build on whatever you are, I think, as any kind of art, not just writing, and it comes through in your work. But you have to allow yourself to be free, let go, to let that happen. And that's the hard part. Let yourself be free. At least for me. Wow.
Whose name is Will Spector? So who is Will Spector?
Will Spector. I guess I would like Ethan Hawke. I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
I actually met Ethan Hawke once. I've dabbled with Hollywood. It's been a crazy long. HBO had set up Journey to Nowhere as a film, and Billy Friedkin, the director, was attached. You know, and a bunch of other books. No, but they keep threatening to make movies out of my books, but they don't. And one of those threats, I met Ethan Hawke, and I liked him. He's a nice guy.
Hello, Ethan, if you're out there.
Yes, Ethan, call me. We'll set up the film. So we're there. It was great being here. Oh, I just want to shout out before we part, the photographer, the cover photo is here, Danielle Starkey. So I appreciate her being here. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, when I took this photo, it was actually at quite a great distance where I was safe and thought he wasn't safe. So this photo was in case it needed to be sent to his parents. If he perished out there in the surf.
So Danielle just said that she took the photo in case the wave was going to sweep me away, and she was going to send it to my parents because she was going to document my death. So
Great. Gosh, so that's
me.
That's you.
I sent my publisher 50, 60 photos. I just threw this one in there for the heck of it, and the artist loved it. The designer loved it. So it's kind of weirdly personal.
Yeah,
You were,
that's
what,
really
20, how old were you?
Oh God, this was 1980. We were dating in 1989. So what was I? How many years ago was that?
33
Wow.
years ago.
Half my life ago, almost. Wow.
interesting story for that cover. It is a striking cover.
Probably shouldn't admit that, but
He
I
was harvesting mussels for our dinner, I should point out.
I was looking for mussels for our dinner. I wasn't just out there gratuitously.
Yeah. So I hope you can find this book and buy it, and Dale will sign a card. And don't leave as one of my I heard a presentation here in the last year or so where somebody said every time they walk to the front register, they end up with like $75 worth of books. So and then he said he felt like it was his moral imperative to do that. So I would second that.
Oh, we
Not
love
my
the
guy,
independent bookstores, so please, yes, support.
Is the book not available?
It's supply chain problems. Supposed to be here. But either you're Zen or drunk by my age. And so I don't want to be drunk, so I'm trying to be Zen.
And you will get the book. if you purchase it.
On that note, thank you. Talk to people.
Great. Let's keep it going for Dale and Catherine once more. Okay, so if you missed it earlier, I'm happy to explain. Also, thank you both for an excellent conversation. Thank you all out there on the internet. We have these great looking little postcards that have the date and our location on the back. Dale will sign them for you. You can still purchase a book through us, and then you can insert this in your book when they do arrive, which should be in the next couple days. We're happy to get your information at the front, ship it to you, have it ready here for you to pick up, whichever you prefer. And if you have any more questions about that, I'm happy to answer. Oh, yeah.
I don't want you to fall.
Yeah, you're good. Other than that, thank you so much.
You know, the marijuana, you know,
I feel like I was
cigars and
a
mixed
Oh, I
with-
know, it's so much fun without the
Oh.
voice. I think it's like a
I taste